I'm Vina. My father had just been buried when my sister-in-law looked my mother dead in the eye and said, "Get out, and take that worthless ranch with you." My brother, he didn't say a word to stop her. He smiled, and then calmly, he said 4 words that broke her: "You failed as a mother." They threw her out into the freezing rain. The woman who gave up everything for them. By the time I found out, she was standing alone by the locked gate, shivering. I drove 250 miles that night. But what I saw when I arrived still keeps me up. Tell me, what would you have done if your family turned on the one person who loved the most? Let me tell you what happened next. Because they thought they'd won. They were wrong. I was still breathing. And so was she. The phone rang just after midnight. At first, I thought it was a wrong number. No one calls past midnight unless it's bad news. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number, local area code. I hesitated, but something in me said, "Pick up." "Vina, it's Ruth." Ruth Evans. I froze. Ruth was our neighbor back in Cold Creek. I hadn't heard her voice in years. And hearing it now, shaking, brittle, told me this wasn't a social call. "It's your mother, Vina. She's outside in the rain." I didn't know who else to call. "She's standing by the front gate. She won't answer me." I sat up straight, cold creeping into my chest even before the words fully sank in. "Where exactly?" My voice cracked. "Your family's place. She's right there." I tried to bring her inside, but she keeps saying she's waiting. "For who?" "I don't know, honey." I was already out of bed, grabbing jeans over the old sweats I'd slept in. My keys, wallet, boots. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear Ruth's next words. "She's not okay, Vina." The call ended. My mind didn't. I drove out of Denver before the clock hit 1 a.m. The snow was falling harder than I expected, but nothing would have stopped me. Not after what happened 2 days ago. Not after I stood there silent and watched her leave. The ranch sat 250 miles away. But that night, it felt like another world. As the miles blurred past, so did the memories. Dad's funeral had been brutal, but not in the way funerals usually are. It was Celine's show from the start. She picked the music, controlled the speeches, stood beside Silas, perfectly poised, perfectly cold. Mom. She'd been treated like a guest. No worse. Like a nuisance. I remembered Celine's voice, sickly sweet but edged with steel, as she made her announcement during the will reading after the service. "Since Dad's gone, we need to be practical. The ranch is worthless. Amity, you can take it. Just get out." Mom had flinched like she'd been slapped. But what gutted me wasn't Celine. It was Silas. He just stood there next to his wife, looking down at our mother like she was someone who'd wronged him. "You failed as a mother," he said. No raised voice. No anger. Just cold. And God help me, I said nothing. I watched as Mom picked up her old purse, the same one she'd carried for years, and walked out into the snow. Alone. I'd stood frozen in that moment, and in too many before. Now, with every mile of black ice and whiteout ahead, I hated myself for it. The snow thickened. I turned up the heater, but it didn't help the cold inside me. I thought about the ranch. About growing up there. About the times Mom skipped meals to make sure Silas and I had enough. About the early mornings she'd worked the barn alone after Dad's back gave out. None of it mattered now. To them, she was disposable. To me, she was the last person in this world who'd never let me down. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I wasn't just driving back home. I was driving towards something I should have done a long time ago. If she's still standing, I'll fight for her. 3 hours passed before the town limits appeared. Cold Creek hadn't changed much. Same closed-up gas stations, same boarded-up storefronts. But the house looked like it belonged to strangers now. As I turned the corner, my headlights sliced through the snow. Then I saw her, a small figure by the front gate, soaked to the bone, shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself disappear. I pulled over so fast the tires skidded, left the engine running. My breath fogged up the windshield as I sat frozen for half a second. In her hand, she was clutching something small. A gray-blue handkerchief. Dad's. She always carried it when she was scared. I opened the door. I ran toward her, my boots slipping over patches of frozen gravel. Each step felt heavier than the last, like something inside me already knew what I was about to find. She wasn't standing anymore. By the time I reached the gate, my mother was sitting down right there in the snow, her back against the iron post, like she'd simply given up halfway through waiting. Her coat was soaked through, clinging to her shoulders. Her hands, pale and stiff, but her grip was locked around that small piece of cloth, Dad's handkerchief. I dropped to my knees beside her. "Mom. Mom, look at me." She didn't. Her eyes flickered but didn't focus, like she was somewhere else entirely. Her lips were blue. I fumbled the blanket from my car, wrapping it around her shoulders, trying to work her arms loose from the rigid posture. She resisted at first, not fighting, more like a body forgetting how to respond. "Please, please come with me," I whispered. She didn't speak. Her fingers wouldn't let go of the handkerchief. I crouched there, shielding her as best I could from the snow coming down harder now, knowing damn well I couldn't stay long. She needed warmth. Needed to get out of the storm. It took longer than it should have, but eventually I got her to her feet. Her body moved like it wasn't hers anymore. I kept an arm around her back, half carrying her to the car. She never once looked back at the house. Inside, with the heater blasting and the doors closed, I tried to get her talking. Nothing. She just stared at her lap, at her hands, at that gray-blue cloth, until her voice cracked open like old wood. She called me trash. I froze. Mom didn't raise her head. "In front of your father's friends." My throat closed. The tears hit before I could stop them. Mine, not hers. I remembered Celine's voice, clear as day now. The way she spoke at the will reading, like Mom wasn't even human. Like, after all the years, all the sacrifices, she was just in the way. She called her trash. I'd been there. And I let it happen. My mother's next words shattered whatever pieces of me were left. "Do you know what hurts?" Her voice sounded distant. I didn't even cry. Her fingers tightened on the handkerchief. I didn't know what to say. Nothing would have helped. Nothing would have fixed what I let happen. She whispered something else. "Siridaki parkei becliorum." She smiled when she said it. I remembered. Celine. Her lipstick perfect. Her voice sugar-sweet. Like humiliating my mother was just housekeeping. Mom closed her eyes. She smiled. "Vina." I shook where I sat, one hand gripping the steering wheel like I needed something solid to hold on to. "Mom, that wasn't your fault." The moment the words left me, I knew how hollow they sounded. Mom kept her eyes closed. "It wasn't your father's fault either. It was mine." I stared at her. "I raised him that way. Silas." Her voice cracked again, but not from crying. From something colder. "He knew your father was dying." I stared at her, not understanding. "He knew weeks before they told you." I shook my head, refusing to believe what I was hearing. "Mom, no. He kept it from you." I couldn't breathe. "They told me after," she said. The words hit like ice water. My stomach flipped, but I couldn't move. "They said, why upset her? Why make her rush back?" I couldn't process it. Silas. My brother. The person I'd trusted all my life to tell me the truth. Mom looked at me now. Really looked. "He let your father die without you." I covered my mouth with both hands. I remembered the call from Silas, the one that brought me back for the funeral. No warning, no hint, just, "Dad's gone." I thought about how calm Silas had sounded. I thought about all the weeks I'd kept pushing back trips home, telling myself Dad was stable, that I'd have more time. And he'd known all along. "He wanted the money, Vina," Mom said softly. "Your father's share. The ranch. Everything." My heart fractured in ways I didn't know were possible. I'd spent my whole life seeing Silas as the strong one, the protector. Now I realized, he was the reason I missed saying goodbye. Mom reached for my hand, weak and shaking. She wasn't trying to comfort me. She just needed to feel human. I turned toward the window, unable to stop the tears now. My hands trembled, but not from the cold. Outside, The house loomed in the darkness, silent, locked. No lights inside. For the first time, I saw it for what it was. Not home. Not anymore. My family isn't my family anymore. The thought wasn't a scream. It was quiet, simple, and it terrified me. The tires crunched against the gravel as I steered us toward the old ranch house. My hands were still shaking. I kept glancing at Mom in the passenger seat, wrapped in the blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. She hadn't spoken since her confession about Silas. The porch light didn't work. I pulled up as close as I could, killed the engine, and stepped out. Cold hit me instantly, but I ignored it. I walked around, opened her door, and coaxed her out slowly, one step at a time. The house creaked as we entered, the kind of sound I remembered from childhood storms. The sound that used to scare me until Dad told me it was the house settling in for the night. Now, it sounded tired, abandoned. I laid Mom down on the old couch by the fireplace. There were no logs, no warmth, just silence. She didn't protest. She barely moved. I pulled a heavier quilt from the hall closet, covering her fully this time, tucking it in like I used to when I played nurse as a little girl. Her eyes stayed closed. For a moment, I just watched her. Her cheeks hollowed, her skin pale, her fingers still stained red where the cold had bitten her outside. And that handkerchief, Dad's, still clutched between her fingers. I whispered, "Sleep now." For the first time in what felt like days, she did. I stood there for minutes, maybe longer, unsure what to do next. The house smelled like dust and time. I heard the wind scrape the loose porch boards outside. I needed answers. Somewhere in this house, Dad had left her something. Something Celine and Silas didn't want her, or me, to find. I started in their bedroom. Drawers, closet, shelves, nothing. Except behind a stack of old clothes in the closet, shoved awkwardly into the back corner. There was a box. Not locked. Not hidden well. Just neglected. I dragged it out, coughing at the dust cloud that erupted. Inside, letters. Dozens of them. Still sealed. Yellowed envelopes, all addressed to Dad. Some dating back years. Underneath, folded documents. Deeds. Surveys. Hand-sketched maps. What was this? My fingers shook as I pulled out the largest sheet, a survey map of the property lines. I recognized the ranch's layout, though some areas were marked differently, circled in red ink. There was a letter newer than the rest, 6 months old, from a company I'd never heard of. No signature. No official header. Just an offer. They wanted to lease the land. Not for cattle. For mineral exploration. I felt cold crawl up my spine. Why would someone want to mine this land? Dad always said the ranch was worthless. Good for grazing, nothing more. He'd repeated it my whole life. So why had he kept this? Why hadn't he told Mom? I folded the letter fully and stood up, my mind spinning faster than my heartbeat. Someone knew something we didn't. And my father had refused to sell. I stepped quietly back into the living room. Mom was still asleep. Her chest rose and fell, slow and even. I glanced at the clock. Almost 9 a.m. Snow still lined the windowsills outside. I needed someone who might know the truth. I needed Ruth Petton. Her house sat at the far edge of the property, just past the fence line. Growing up, she was always Miss Ruth to me, a woman who smelled like lavender and pipe smoke, who'd baked pies for every county fair. She was old now, nearing 80, but sharp as ever. If anyone remembered why Dad held on to this ranch, it'd be her. I scribbled a quick note for Mom in case she woke and panicked, then left. The snow crunched underfoot as I followed the old path I hadn't walked in years. Ruth opened her door before I even knocked. "Took you long enough," she said. I blinked. "You knew I'd come." She just shrugged. "Your mother still breathing?" I nodded. She stepped aside. "Come in, girl." The warmth inside her house nearly made me cry. Once I sat down, she poured coffee without asking. And then she said the one thing that changed everything. "I told your daddy not to trust Silas." I looked up sharply. "What?" Her eyes, pale as the snow outside, didn't waver. "He's your brother, Vina. But he was never your father's son. Not really. I didn't understand. Ruth leaned in slightly. Your daddy found copper. The word barely registered. Copper. She nodded. Beneath the east pasture. Maybe more. A company came sniffing years back, but he sent them packing. I sat back, stunned. Ruth sipped her coffee like she'd just told me the weather forecast. He wanted to protect it. Not because of the money, but because he knew what people like your brother and Celine would do for money. I shook my head. But he never told Mom. No. Because she would have trusted Silas, just like you did. I swallowed hard. Your daddy thought he'd have more time, I whispered. He didn't. No, Ruth said softly. He didn't. I sat there in silence for a long while. Ruth said nothing more. She didn't need to. When I stood up to leave, her final words followed me to the door. Don't let them take it from her. Back at the ranch, I sat beside Mom again. She was still sleeping. I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time in my life, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman. A woman who had given everything, and had almost nothing left. I leaned close. I think Dad left you a fortune. And they knew. The phone screen glared up at me like it had been waiting all morning. Private number. But I knew. I knew before I touched the screen that it would be him. Silas. I didn't answer. I stood by the old kitchen window, sunlight just starting to break through the cloud cover. The snow outside reflected that harsh light back into the room, making everything inside seem colder than it already was. My breath misted near the glass. The phone vibrated again. Celine. I let it ring. Mom was still asleep in the other room. For once, breathing slow. I wasn't ready to disturb that peace yet. Not after what they'd done to her. Another vibration. Voicemail. Then another. And another. I didn't want to listen. But I did. First message. Celine's voice. Smooth. Flat. Businesslike. Vina, it's Celine. Look, about the mineral rights paperwork, we should probably coordinate before any unnecessary misunderstandings happen. You know how easily these things get complicated. Like we were colleagues. Not family. Second message. Silas, trying his old big brother tone, the one that used to calm me down when I skinned my knees at 5 years old. Sis, hey, just heard you're back at the ranch. Wasn't expecting that. Maybe we should sit down. Talk this through. Just us. I didn't realize I was gripping the edge of the sink until I felt my knuckles ache. A third voicemail came through before the second one even finished. I didn't listen. I deleted it. I knew what they wanted now. They knew about the land. They'd known long before me. The kitchen felt smaller. The air tighter. Then the phone rang again. Celine. Not hiding this time. Full caller ID. I stared at the screen. And answered. Vina. Her voice shifted, smoother now, almost warm. I know you're overwhelmed. Let's not drag your mother deeper into this. You know she's not capable of handling legal matters. You've always been the emotional one. Let us help you. I said nothing. Vina, you there? Silence. You can't handle this alone. You're not equipped. The words stung. But not like before. I let them settle. Then I spoke. I know what you did to her. Celine hesitated. For half a second. The silence on her end spoke louder than anything else. And to me, I added. She exhaled. Sharp. Fine. Play the victim. It suits you. Click. I stared at the phone for a long time after the call ended. Then, without hesitation, I opened my contacts list. Celine Witt. Delete. Call history. Delete. Silas's name. 2 entries. Delete. I wasn't theirs anymore. The wind rattled the kitchen window as I stood there, staring at the snow. Somewhere behind me, the old clock on the wall ticked in stubborn rhythm. I'd grown up listening to that clock. Now, it just counted down to something I wasn't ready to name. I turned, trying to clear my mind, and started cleaning the counter. Automatic. I needed movement. Anything to cut through the fog that had settled in my chest. Then my fingers brushed against something I hadn't noticed before. A chipped ceramic mug, white with a faint blue rim. Dad's. The inside was stained from years of black coffee. The way he'd always liked it. No sugar. No cream. I picked it up carefully, held it like it might crack. Suddenly, it wasn't just a mug. It was him. All those mornings he'd sat in this very kitchen, steam rising from this exact cup while he told me the weather forecast like it was prophecy. I could almost hear his voice now. "They'll always underestimate you, Vin." I clutched the mug tighter, pressing it against my ribs where the ache was strongest. If Celine wanted this ranch. If Silas thought he could erase Mom like she was some leftover he could sweep off the porch. They'd have to take it from me. I whispered it aloud. They'll have to take it from me. The sun shifted behind the clouds outside, casting a dull gray light through the window. I stood there unmoving, the mug in my hand, the phone silent beside me. The morning after that phone call, I stood in the kitchen, staring down at the contract papers spread across the table. My fingers curled around my father's old coffee mug. The chipped rim pressed against my palm like a warning I wasn't ready to heed. The house was still quiet. But my mind wasn't. The mineral rights offer. The maps. The proposal buried in his closet. All of it pointed to one fact. He'd known. And he'd trusted Mom to guard the ranch. Not Silas. Not me. I glanced toward the back bedroom where Mom slept. She'd barely spoken since we brought her back from the gate that night. When she did, it was soft, faded, like her voice belonged to someone else. "Now, I'll handle this," I whispered to myself, like saying it aloud might make me believe it. A knock at the door broke the silence. Ruth Peton. She stepped inside without waiting, like she'd always done since I was a kid. She smelled like snow and would smoke. "You look like your father when he used to think too much," she said softly, glancing at the papers, then at the mug. "You holding that like it's going to answer your questions." I almost smiled. Almost. "I don't know what I'm doing, Ruth." She settled into the chair across from me. Her hands, old but steady, folded in front of her. "This land always held more than rocks, Vina. It held your father's last act of love." I frowned. "Copper deposits aren't exactly love." Ruth shook her head slowly. "That ranch was never about money for him. It was about protecting something real, something no one could take from him." I swallowed hard. Ruth leaned in a little, voice low. "The question isn't what this land's worth, Vina. It's what you're worth." I sat there long after she left. By midday, I was behind the wheel of my truck, the snow now slush as I headed toward Grand Junction. The mining company's office wasn't much to look at. Brick. Tired. Like most things out here. But Frank Torres wasn't tired. He shook my hand with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "Ms. Whitlow, thanks for coming in." I nodded once, forcing calm. "Vina." He gestured toward a seat. "Straight to business. We're ready to offer $3.5 million for your mineral rights up front, plus standard royalties on production." I said nothing. Let him wait. Frank cleared his throat. "You'll find that's more than fair." I looked him dead in the eye. "You're sitting on copper." Frank blinked. I leaned forward, steady, and a family betrayal deep in my chest. For the first time, he hesitated. I didn't let up. "I know the worth of this land, and I know my brother and sister-in-law have been circling this company for months, trying to sell you something they don't own." Frank glanced down at the folder in front of him, then back up. "What are you asking?" I held my voice steady, even as my heart pounded. $4 million up front. 15% royalty. And a clause stating that any attempts by other parties to interfere will void this agreement. He studied me for a long time. Then finally, he nodded. $4 million, he agreed slowly. And 10%. I didn't blink. 15. Another long pause. Fine. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first thing I'd taken back from them. The drive home felt longer. I parked outside the ranch house but stayed in the truck, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. What if I failed? What if everything Silas said was right? Too soft to run anything. I could hear his voice like he was sitting right beside me. I let the tears fall, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the release. Then I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove up to the house. No. Not this time. That night, after Mom had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen again. The house smelled like dust and memories. I signed the preliminary papers. My name. My decision. I'd chosen. And for the first time in days, I heard footsteps behind me. Mom. She moved slowly, carefully, but she moved. And in the morning, when I woke, she was sitting at the table, holding the contract in her hands. Morning light seeped weakly through the small window above the kitchen sink. I found her hunched over the table, her fingers trembling against the paper. "Is this what he left us?" she asked softly, without looking at me. I stood still for a moment, unsure how much of the truth she was ready to carry. My throat tightened. "It's part of it, Mom," I said eventually, my voice low. "But I'll handle everything now. You don't need to worry." She nodded faintly, but her eyes stayed hollow. I made coffee. The old drip pot rattled like always. The smell filled the silence, but it didn't warm the house. She didn't touch her cup. I sat with her until her breathing slowed, until her hands stopped shaking. Then my phone rang. I checked the screen without answering. Celine. I silenced it. It rang again. Silas. I let it go to voicemail, but my stomach curled tighter. I forced myself to wait a few minutes before opening their messages. One after another, I listened in silence. Celine's voice, cool and detached. "We should coordinate on the mineral rights paperwork. No need to complicate things." Then Silas, pretending to sound casual. "Ven, didn't know you were back at the ranch. Look, maybe we should sit down, talk this through. Just family. Just family." The way he said it made my skin crawl. They knew. They had known all along. And now they were trying to contain me. When the phone rang again, I answered. Celine didn't waste time pretending anymore. "Vina, I'm going to make this clear," she snapped. "That land isn't yours. Legally, Silas is entitled to at least half, probably more. You're over your head." I said nothing. I just listened. "You think you're clever sitting up there?" Her voice grew shrill. "You'll regret not staying quiet." That was when I hung up. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding my phone like it was something rotten. My mother sat silent across from me, still staring at the table. My breath felt heavy in my chest. Without a word, I stepped outside. The cold hit me instantly, but I didn't care. I crossed the yard blindly, past the leaning fence toward the old barn. My legs gave out near the sidewall, and I sank down, knees scraping dirt, snow clinging to the hem of my jeans. And I broke. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just silent tears running down my face. I remembered being 9 years old. Silas pushing me on the tire swing. Telling me no one would mess with me. Because he was my brother. I whispered into the cold. "I believed in you." I don't know how long I sat there. I only knew Ruth's voice when it came. "Vina." I looked up. Ruth Petton stood there wrapped in her brown winter coat. Her old boots crusted with snow. She didn't scold me. Didn't ask questions. She knelt beside me and said softly, "You think this is where it ends, child? This is just the part where you choose." I shook my head. "I can't fight them. I'm not. If they're this angry," she said, "you're finally doing something right." She helped me stand. Her hand was rough and warm against mine. "You've got your father's grit," she added. "He wasn't loud either. But he didn't move when pushed." I looked away, not ready to believe her. Then Ruth's voice changed, sharpened. "You should know something." I turned back. "That big house they're living in now, Silas claims it, right? Claims it's his." I nodded, wary. Ruth glanced toward the ridge, where the silhouette of the house just barely showed. "Well, your father never transferred the mineral rights beneath it. Not officially. That land's still in Amity's name." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. They've been living on what's legally yours." Ruth didn't say more. She just waited. And that's when something shifted inside me. I wasn't the little sister anymore. I wasn't the girl who believed in other people more than herself. I gripped Ruth's hand, not caring if she saw me shaking. "If they want war," I whispered, "I'll show them war." She nodded once, solemn. I didn't cry again. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, my laptop open, screen glowing faintly in the dark. I filed the mineral rights claim under my name. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the cracked blinds in the ranch office. I sat there alone, staring at the stack of mineral rights paperwork I'd filed just hours earlier. The silence was heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath. I felt it pressing against my skin, reminding me that this wasn't over. Not even close. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to look at the screen. I knew. I hesitated. For a long, cold moment, I debated letting it ring. But something inside me, the part that had walked barefoot across this ranch as a kid, chasing after a brother who once promised to protect me, made me answer. His voice came through like a blade. "We both know what you did." I stayed silent. "You filed the claim." Still, I said nothing. Finally, he shifted. Voice strained. Not angry. Not arrogant. Something worse. Controlled panic. "Let's not drag this out, Vina. We can be reasonable. Just meet with me. We'll work this out." I looked down at the paperwork, at the signature with my own name scrawled across it. The memory of standing in that office, my hand shaking as I signed, it all came rushing back. "I tried being reasonable," I said, my voice low, steady. You laughed. The silence on his end was thick. I could hear Celine in the background, distant but sharp, her voice slicing through his like static. "Tell her to hand it over. Tell her she's making a fool of herself." I didn't speak. I let the weight of my silence settle like dust. Silas tried again. "Think of the family." That did it. I could feel my pulse thumping behind my eyes. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. "Mom is family," I whispered. "You left her outside in the rain." This time, he didn't answer. I let the call hang for a beat longer, then ended it without another word. Sliding the phone onto the desk, I sat there, breathing shallow and slow. The power shift wasn't a victory yet. But for the first time, I wasn't the one scrambling. I stood up and crossed the hallway, pushing open the door to Mom's room. She was awake. She looked older than she had yesterday. Smaller. Her hair, once carefully tied back, fell in loose strands around her face. Her eyes found mine. "Will they come here?" she asked softly. I swallowed, forced myself to smile, just enough to be believable. "No. Not anymore." She nodded once and looked away. I stayed there a moment longer, then stepped back into the hall, pulling the door closed behind me. I returned to the office. But I didn't sit. The phone rang again. I picked it up before thinking. "Vina." "Silas." Again. But his voice had changed. Colder now. Sharper. He wasn't pretending anymore. "I didn't want to do this." I waited. "I have pictures, Virginia." My stomach turned to stone. "Of Mom. After Dad died. You weren't there." "But I was." I closed my eyes, steadying myself against the edge of the desk. "She wasn't well. There were episodes. People saw. You know what that can look like." I said nothing. He pushed harder. "If this goes public, if the right people see those photos, it's elder abuse, Vina. Financial exploitation. You'll look like the one stealing from her." My breath caught. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. "She's sick," he continued. "Quieter now. Calculated. You've dragged her out here to this ranch, and you're making decisions for her alone." I leaned against the wall. The phone pressed too hard to my ear. "You're bluffing," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew he wasn't. We both know Mom doesn't remember half of what's happened. And that was the final blow. I heard him exhale slowly, like victory was already his. Then the call ended. I stood there, the silence roaring in my ears. I stared down at the floorboards, cracked and worn, remembering all the times I'd run across them barefoot, chasing after someone I thought would always be there. I slid down the wall, sat on the floor, back pressed to the wood, knees pulled tight to my chest. The house felt colder than it had in years. Minutes passed. Or hours. I couldn't tell. At some point, I heard Mom's door creak open. But I didn't move. I just listened to her footsteps, shuffling slowly across the hallway. She stopped just outside the office. I didn't look up. She didn't speak. But I heard her breathing. Slow, shallow, fragile. And I knew, without her saying a word, what Silas was capable of. They wouldn't hesitate. They'd drag her name through the dirt, if it meant breaking me. And sitting there in that silence, something inside me cracked, but didn't break. I realized, finally, fully, they'll ruin her just to destroy me. And yet, something inside me said, not this time. I stood by the kitchen window, phone pressed to my ear. Frank's voice on the other end felt like a lifeline stretched thin across the miles. They're scared, Vina. That's why they're pushing. Hold your ground. His words were steady, but my hand shook as I set the phone down. Outside, the frost still clung to the fence posts. Morning sun doing little to chase off the cold. I wasn't sure if I was cold from the weather, or from everything breaking inside me. By mid-morning, I heard the sound that made my stomach clench, tires crunching over frozen dirt. I didn't need to look. I knew who it was. Silas and Celine. They didn't knock. I watched from the porch as they strode straight toward the house. Arrogance in every step. Silas led, eyes hard, jaw clenched. Celine followed, lips pressed tight, her usual smugness replaced by something harsher. They stopped just outside the fence line, right where Dad's old private property sign still hung crooked. I stepped out slowly, boots crunching in the snow. I didn't say anything. Neither did they. For a few seconds, it was just breathing. White puffs in the freezing air. You're really going through with this? Silas's voice cracked the silence. I kept my gaze level. I'm finishing what you started. Celine scoffed behind him. Don't be dramatic. I ignored her. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope, held it between two fingers, let it swing slightly, enough for Silas to notice. What's that? He demanded. Copies. My voice was flat. Of the mineral rights documents, including those beneath your house. Silas flinched. Celine stepped forward, voice shrill. You can't. I did, I said, cutting her off. Silas tried to recover. Look, Vina, this isn't good for anyone. Let's sit down. Talk this through. Like family. Family. I laughed. Bitter and dry. You threw Mom out in the rain. You called her a failure. You don't get to say family to me. I tossed the envelope at Silas's feet. It landed on the snow. Dark paper against white. You want to see what losing looks like? Open it. Celine's face twisted. You're bluffing. I recorded the threats, Celine, I said quietly. Every voicemail. Every word. And I've already hired a lawyer. Elder abuse. Defamation. Theft. Silas bent to pick up the envelope. His hand trembled. You'll ruin everything, he said, almost whispering. You did that yourselves. Celine lunged toward me then, but Silas caught her arm. And for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear. I held his gaze, and said the last thing I had to say. You didn't just fail Mom. You failed yourself. Silas let Celine go. She pulled her arm free, cursing under her breath. But he didn't react. He just looked down at the envelope, like it weighed more than anything he'd ever carried. Neither of them said another word. They turned, walked back to their truck. I stood there, watching, until the dust from their tires faded into the cold morning air. "You done now?" Ruth's voice came soft behind me. I hadn't heard her walk up. I nodded once. She stepped beside me, staring down the empty road. "Does it feel like winning?" she asked. I swallowed. "It feels like ending." Neither of us spoke after that. The wind did the talking for us. Hours later, back inside, I found Mom sitting up in bed. The contract I'd signed lay across her lap. Her fingers traced the paper as if it was something fragile. When she looked up at me, her eyes were clearer than they'd been in weeks. "Did you save the ranch, baby?" she asked softly. I wanted to tell her the whole truth, every broken piece of it. But instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand, and said the only thing that mattered in that moment. "Yes, Mom. I saved us both. I just didn't know what came after saving. But now I do. It's silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that used to haunt this place, but the kind that feels earned. The kind that says, * you fought. You endured. And now, you rest. *. And I just sit there in the silence, not waiting, just letting it be, letting the wind move through the brittle grass, watching the last of the sun slip behind the ridge like it's folding itself into the land. The world is quiet here, not because there's nothing left to say, but because I've finally stopped needing to say it. The porch boards creak beneath me with every small shift, and the coffee in my hands cools slow, just like everything else. Inside, I hear the rhythm of Mom's hum falter, then return, a scattered tune that drifts through the screen door and wraps around me like the smell of warm hay. And for once, I don't feel the urge to go in, to fix anything, to brace for what might come next. For so long, my life moved between waiting and reacting. Waiting for the next blow, reacting to every silence that followed. But now I'm still. This is not a story with a grand ending. There are no clean cuts, no final reckonings. Just small choices, soft ones, like planting lavender where the gate used to creak, like replacing broken windows with ones that open, like letting go of the parts of myself that were built around someone else's expectations. I don't think about Silas anymore. Or Celine. I don't wonder if they'll come back. They won't. And if they do, I'll still be here. Not as a version of myself they once shaped, but as the woman I've become in their absence. I think about the stories I used to tell myself, about what makes a person good, about what makes family worth holding on to. And I think maybe we all rewrite those stories when we have to. Mine now begins here, on this porch, with the smell of coffee and frost, with the hum of a tired house learning how to breathe again, with the sound of Mom, not whole, but here, with a windmill creaking just loud enough to remind me that even still things can turn. This is the kind of silence I never knew I was allowed to have. Not empty, not hollow, but earned. And as the last of the light disappears behind the hill, and the cold begins to rise from the earth, I don't move. I just breathe, because that's all that's left to do now. And somehow, it's enough.